Welcome to A Real Point of View here on, I guess this would be YouTube and also Google+. Thanks for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. We're on our second half of our show, our after show. We're coming in from our Blog Talk radio show. And the topic of discussion today are three films. The first of which is My Left Foot with Daniel Day-Lewis. The second is The Miracle Worker with Patty Duke Austin and Anne Bancroft. And the latter is The Bone Collector with Denzel Washington and really a cast, a host, a lot of people, but primarily Angelina Jolie. So our conversation really is talking about the different films, what we liked about the films, but also to the extraordinary case of the humanity issue here with people who have multiple challenges that the majority of the population don't have. In the first movie, we're talking about Daniel Day-Lewis's portrayal of Christy Brown, and Christy Brown's from birth not being able to do the things that most people can do and end up being a virtuoso when it comes to many things that that the rest of us have challenges he was able to overcome. Real briefly, Karen, an overview of My Left Foot. What did you like about it? Just one point. And what did you dislike about it? Just one point.
I like the way it showed how brilliance can be exemplified in the unlikeliest places. So that's what I really liked about that movie. And well, like I said on our Blog Talk radio portion of the program, I didn't like the cheesy Hollywood constructs that were employed to make Christy Brown this really likable guy. That's what I dislike. And I guess I dislike that so intensely because the movie was about this human person, and the artificial constructs aren't needed to make him more humane. He's an extraordinary person in any event, and so that sort of artifice wasn't needed. And to me, that was kind of like a cheap way out. That's what I disliked about it.
Now, for those of you listening in who aren't familiar with Christy Brown, this is a real person. This is a person who actually lived. This is a biopic for this particular film. And, you know, with all the other things out there, I think when it comes to film, you can only do so much. But how you approach it is what makes the difference. And I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, Karen, if it had been approached a little differently, we actually would have gotten a better understanding and a better view of the true, real person in Christy Brown. However, with the film that was produced, we also come away with how wonderfully acted this was by Daniel Day-Lewis. Yes?
Right. Yes, you really do. I mean, you can't help that. I mean, he makes Christy Brown seem completely real from the time that he enters the scenes in the movie until the very end of the movie. It's his movie. And you know, it's very easy. I think it would be very easy to sort of make the mannerisms and especially the mannerisms of somebody who suffers from cerebral palsy, you know, sort of unreal or fakey or whatever. And there's never, I mean, I looked for unreal moments. I couldn't find them. Mm-hmm. In watching Daniel Day-Lewis's performance, everything just seemed really, you know, from like organic, from rooted in real experience. And I really felt like I was looking at Christy Brown, mm-hmm. watching Christy Brown, not some guy playing a guy with cerebral palsy who happens to be named Christy Brown. I felt like I was watching Christy Brown. And that's the kind of quality to me that Daniel Day-Lewis brings to all of his movies. I mean, I can't think of any bad performance that he has ever given in any of the movies. From My Beautiful Laundrette came out around the same time as My Left Foot. Can you think of two different people, two different characters in two different movies? And yet he starred in both of those movies, and, you know, pretty freaking amazing. You know, he does comedies. He's played brutes, gangsters.
The president.
He's played Lincoln, and he played the hell out of that character.
He did.
You know, he played, I mean, he was amazing, I thought, in A Room with a View, where he played this very sort of this dilettante to great comedic effect. Hard to believe that was the same person, but it was, you know.
And so, now I want to mention a movie too, other than Lincoln. He played Natty Bumpel
in Gangsters of New York, or what? Oh, boy, you lost me there.
Growing up as a child, and I'll be very brief. Growing up as a child, reading books, one of my favorite characters in literature was Hawkeye, and his real name, his given name was Natty Bumpel, but he called him Hawkeye. The movie and the book that I'm referring to is The Last of the Mohicans.
Oh, of course.
He did wonderful in that film. He was the vision, the embodiment of the vision that I had when I read the story by was it James Fenimore Cooper? I think I'm saying that wrong.
Yes. No, you got it right.
And it was just amazing to see it. I'd seen other portrayals in movies prior to that, but none as well done as Daniel Day-Lewis in that film. So I am a big fan of his because he seemed like he puts it all on the line. He puts his heart into all of it. And that's why you get such wonderful performances. The Streets of New York was a little hokey for me, but he still made me believe that he was as evil as he was in that film. Yeah. And so that being said, it's hard. I'm like you, Karen. It would be hard pressed for me to find a movie that he did bad or did poorly in. And if it was poor, it was poor to the standards of him.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, if you look at his body of work, he doesn't have like hundreds of, you know, credits as an actor in terms of major film projects. There's only 28. Which is very low for someone of his stature, an Academy Award winner. And not all the movies, like you said, were good. Like Gangs of New York had issues, even though it was directed by Martin Scorsese. The Boxer, I don't know if that was considered a great film, but certainly his performance was considered.
His performance was really good. The film as a whole had a lot of potholes, but his performance, he's a great actor, just period.
He really is. You know, he was amazing, I thought, in The Crucible, which was a very good film, the 1996 version of The Crucible. And The Age of Innocence was, you know, a little sort of, that was another Martin Scorsese film where I think the big criticism of this when it came out, I think this was Martin Scorsese was trying to do like a grand sort of movie related to the early 1900s because that sort of thing just hadn't been done. And I don't think the film necessarily succeeded all that much. I mean, unless you're really invested in these characters, it could really be a boring movie.
Yeah.
But
not everybody can do period pieces well, so it's not an easy task, I don't think.
Right, but Martin Scorsese should have been able to pull it off, and he didn't necessarily pull it off. But Daniel Day-Lewis's Newland Archer pulled off. I mean, again, he was compelling interesting person, not because the personality was so interesting, but just because, you wanted to watch him. You bought into what Daniel Day-Lewis was portraying.
Right.
So even in not the best of movies, he does extremely well, but he also, he was in There Will Be Blood, now that is a very good movie. Not one that I've been able to watch, but it's, I've heard that it's a really good movie.
I've heard it's good too. I haven't watched it either. That's one of his more recent films for those of you listening. And it's got my curiosity because of all the things that I've heard and what I've read about it. So.
Right. But his last major film credit was Lincoln. That was 3 years ago. So he's not the type of person who's churning out a movie every year.
Right.
Or even not even necessarily every 2 or 3 years. I think that the movie he was in before Lincoln was 9, which no one has heard of. That was 2009. But the last big budget movie that he was in before Lincoln was There Will Be Blood, which predated Lincoln by 5 years.
And didn't get as much publicity either, I don't think, other than knowing that people were saying such rave things about Daniel Day-Lewis's portrayals.
Right.
But yeah, but maybe that's the thing about art. For him as an artist, getting into the character, maybe it takes a while to get into the essence of the character. But I know if that is the case, I'm not disappointed when I see those films because he does do such a good job. And he's very compelling. So
right.
I got to hand it to him.
Yeah.
So let's talk about The Miracle Worker. We were saying how this was such a superior film, especially for the time, and also because of the people in it and the subject matter. We have a partially blind person who has hearing issues herself out there in Anne Bancroft's character, Anne Sullivan, trying to teach someone who can't hear, can't speak, and can't see. How do you play that? You were making that comment before, Karen, about how do you as a supporting actor or actress try to level out your performance against someone whose portrayal was so wonderful, even in Patty Duke also. I mean, you're playing someone who can't do what most people can. So what'd you like about it? What didn't you like about it? And let's talk a little bit about Anne Bancroft and Patty Duke.
Well, there really isn't anything that I didn't like about this movie. I'm sorry if I'm supposed to find something I didn't like. I can't.
Was there a mouse in the corner somewhere?
No mice. Just
did they sweep some dirt into under a rug that really was a microphone?
No. This was just a brilliant movie all the way around. And like you said, especially for the times, this movie came out in 1962. So this is a 53-year-old movie. It's as compelling today as it was 53 years ago. Right. That says something. It says something about the writing. It says something about the acting. It says something about the story and the production of that story. So this is really one of the great films in, I think, an American cinematography period. It just is. And it's a real tour de force for these women. I mean, Patty Duke was barely a teenager when she did this role. Mm-hmm. And Anne Bancroft was a young woman. I think she was probably in her 20s or maybe in her late 20s when she did this role. So, Anne Bancroft won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her performance in this film. Patty Duke won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. And this is one time when the Academy got it right.
Yeah, they did.
They actually gave it to the right people for once, because these people were just, the acting that's required was just terrific. And like I said, earlier, what I really like about this film was that it didn't try to make Helen Keller, this sort of just misunderstood victim. She was a very, very difficult person. She was unreachable. And she was in this world, this cocoon of a world, or not even a cocoon, but just this shell, this impenetrable shell that had closed around her because of not being able to hear, speak, or see. So the world just comes at you. And you know how when kids, they're playing around, they're like, oh, well, I'll play, I can't see, and blah, blah, and then you stumble around or whatever. There's that. And then there's actually really not being able to see, but then you add not being able to hear on top of that. And because you can't hear, you can't speak, so you can't express anything. And I mean, yeah, she had very violent outbursts. I mean, how could you not? When the world is, people think the world is a scary place when all 5 of their senses are acting. Right. Think how scary it is when 3 of them aren't working at all. Right. So, and then the person who teaches you has some of her own issues to deal with, as you point out. But I would say, rather than that being a problem, it was actually probably a blessing, because that's probably why Annie Sullivan was the one person who could get through to her, because she had some deep understanding of what Helen Keller was dealing with in a way that the typical teachers, if she'd been, I mean, the way the movie starts out, it's like the family's at their wits' end. They're thinking about sending her to an institution. Mm-hmm. But then, as like a Hail Mary, they get Annie Sullivan, and Annie Sullivan starts working with her, and but it wasn't like there weren't any guarantees. It didn't happen overnight. It took years and years of work to get through to her.
Mm-hmm. It's an amazing film about 2 amazing women who truly lived in the world and were experiencing the world. And I think what we, as moviegoers, as human beings, miss some of these realities that people have to deal with. And we take for granted the things that we're able to do more freely. And yet at the same time, to be able to, as I alluded to earlier in our earlier broadcast, be able to utilize whatever mental capacity to communicate when it seemed like it was impossible to communicate. That in itself shows a higher sense of self, a higher sense of cerebral movement. I don't know. All I know is much smarter than me. I'm impressed. I'm aback by how someone could, with all those things going against them, be able to not just be able to deal with it and get a better understanding, but to surpass and be special in communication and in Helen Keller's case, becoming a teacher herself. I mean, that's phenomenal. That's just phenomenal stuff. And right. The best part about it is it happened for real. I love the realism of it. So let's jump off of real and go to fiction in talking about Denzel Washington in The Bone Collector with Angelina Jolie opposite. Here is a situation where a former police officer who is injured while on duty has become a quadriplegic and can no longer utilize those things that he did use when he was a police officer. Now he's able to still utilize his brilliant mind and his vision of perception to help the police find the serial killer. Angelina Jolie plays a police officer who, quote unquote, becomes his eyes, ears, and his legs out in the field as they try to chase down this person. What you like about the film, Karen? What didn't you like?
Well, I didn't like this film so much. Now, let me just draw a bit of a distinction here, because we're dealing with a person in The Bone Collector. Denzel Washington plays, like you said, a former detective, highly decorated detective. He's a world-renowned expert on forensics. He's written 12 books. He's written thousands. There's this one part in the movie where he says, he's trying to convince Angelina Jolie that she has the capacity for forensics work. And she's like, no, not really. And he's like, well, look at me. I came from a family where my parents didn't finish high school or grammar school. They didn't finish a book between the two of them. And I was their son, and I, graduated from college. I not only have read thousands of books, I've written 12 of them. Who would think? So I think the movie, sort of exemplifies that. But there is a stark difference here, because you've got Denzel Washington, who's he's physically immobile, but he can communicate. Mm-hmm. He has his sight, he has his hearing, he has his speech. So that's a different sort of problem being presented in this movie than was presented in A Miracle Worker or My Left Foot, where You've got profound disabilities that affect the very nature of how you communicate. As Denzel Washington had very serious injuries and a very serious disability, but it didn't affect his ability to communicate. So in that sense, I think, and not his physical ability to communicate. Let me rephrase that, because emotionally it did affect his ability to communicate, but it didn't affect his physical ability to speak. It didn't affect his ability to hear, to think, to see. And so because of that, I think the acting job that was presented to Denzel Washington in A Bone Collector, it was a couple of magnitudes simpler than the acting jobs presented to Patty Duke and Daniel Day-Lewis.
Okay.
So there's that distinction I would make. I don't think The Bone Collector is as compelling a movie as the other two are. And not because of the disabilities that Denzel Washington's character deals with. It's not because of that. It's just mainly because of the story and sort of the way in which it's presented. It's just not as compelling. And you're probably going to ask me to be more specific. So I will say this: there is like this chemistry between Angelina Jolie's character and Denzel Washington's character, but it's not clear. I mean, I think, well, it might be clear. The Hollywood sort of version of the story sort of alludes to like a connection that leads to a romantic relationship down the line. Mm-hmm. Why did they need to go there? They didn't. They could have had this really symbiotic professional working relationship that didn't have to involve a sexual chemistry, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And I think it's kind of interesting. In the beginning of the movie, Angelina Jolie's character has a boyfriend who's played by Bobby Cannavale, one of my favorite actors. I love him. He's somebody else. He shines in comedy. He shines in all kinds of situations. He's just a really good actor. Mm-hmm. But he has a small role as her boyfriend in the beginning of the movie, and then he just kind of disappears, and we never see him again. And it's not because his character's been killed off by the serial killer. It's because you know, he can't hold a candle to Denzel, apparently. So, off he goes. Really, people? Come on. The other thing is just this sort of the way in which these serial murders are sort of like constructed. It's like, I have a hard time with this. This just seemed like a lot of gratuitous violence for the sake of gratuitous violence. And not because it's rooted in some, organic way to tell a story, but just because, let me think of a way to really like keep the audience watching, or really scare the crap out of them, or, I can think of a really gruesome way to get this person killed. That'll really make the audience go, oh, not buying that. No, wrong. Don't need that. Because if you have a good story, you don't need those sorts of, I don't know.
Extras.
I don't even, extras, gimmicks. I would call that a gimmick.
Yeah.
I would call that a gimmick. And it's just really not necessary. So a lot of the movie I spent like this. I'm like, okay, is the bad part over yet? Okay, yeah, the rats ate the guy. Okay, have they eaten him yet? So I can look again.
Spoiler alert.
Sorry, but
I haven't seen the movie.
But I mean, just stuff like that. That's just one of many things. And then there's kind of like this sort of, diversion, which you can see coming a mile away. I don't think that was particularly well done, where, in the beginning of the movie, the whole question is, who is this serial killer? Who is this person? And you've got the movie steering you with like, the airplane, go this way to that person. Right. And it's like, no, I mean, it's not that person because the movie's steering you that way so obviously to begin with.
Right.
And so you feel, and then there's like, they're probably hiding in plain sight.
Yes. The best part of a mystery is having the person there all the time.
Right.
And you never know it.
Right.
So we won't spoil it that much more.
No, I'm not going to say anything more about that, but I just found that very odd. I won't say who the person was that the movie's steering you toward either. But it's like, but when you go see the movie and you see all signs point to that person, I think you'll agree with me that, you didn't need to like drive me that hard to that person to keep me guessing as to who it might really be. Because you kind of showed your hand by doing it that way. And if it had been more artfully done, then I could have gone along more for the ride. I think if it had simply been, like a serial murder without all the gruesome characteristics, that was completely unnecessary, then then I also could have gone along for the ride. So I really didn't like that, and I didn't think it added to the story. Ironically, Angelina Jolie filmed some nude scenes for this movie. I don't know what actress she was filming them with. I'm assuming it was maybe Bobby Cannavale, scenes with him, but the director decided not to use them because he felt they would distract from the movie.
Good. One of the reasons why I picked the movie really was more toward not so much the essence of the film as much as it was looking at what you brought up a little earlier, is Denzel Washington not having to necessarily play his role as, or the development of his character in this film was not as demanding as the other two films. What I looked at this film, I thought was interesting for me, is here's a guy who was a decorated police officer, decorated detective, who's had, like you said, all his senses and was able to utilize them in solving crime. And now the point I wanted to make in looking at this was now he can't utilize many of those same traits that he was able to before. And I think it's a very different scenario. And you brought it out very vividly about how in the first two films, which were real people, real life individuals, having to deal with things from inception, dealing with the true essence of their challenges. I thought it was interesting to have somebody who has never had those challenges, that being thrust into a situation now, they have to utilize those challenges. How do you survive that? How do you get your mind past the things that you were able to do, the things you were able to facilitate in your former part of your life, and yet still be viable, feel like I think that's its own struggle, its own differentiation. Yes, but it's almost like you're told by your family that you're going to the candy shop to get all the candy that you want, and you get there and the candy shop burned down. I mean, how do you deal with those issues that are now part of your life that you never dreamed or ever thought you would ever even have to deal with? That was part of the reason why I wanted to do this movie, because it was taking it from a different situation, unlike the prior two films we discussed, in that this was not from inception. This was because of an accident. It's a very different way of looking at it. As you go into something, you realize that this is your reality, and you do the best you can to make the best of it. But what if you had the things that other people have, and now you have to start all over again? It's two different lives now.
Right.
So that was really part of the reason why I picked it, because it wasn't like the others in the sense of having to deal with issues or with circumstances like this from birth.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's a good point. And I think, and he did have, he was emotionally, disabled by what happened, because, and he was ready to end his life. That was the beginning plot point of this movie. He was doing end of life planning and getting his doctor friend to help him, help to assist him with suicide. And his doctor friend promised to do that after he came back from a conference. He promised to do just that. So, he didn't really think he had anything. It wasn't just the fear. He kept saying, I'm afraid of being a vegetable. I'm afraid that these seizures can turn me into a vegetable at any point. Right. That was the surface reasoning, but that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that he felt like he didn't have anything to contribute anymore, and so there wasn't any reason to live. And he, there wasn't going to be a hope of he wasn't going to be in a relationship with anybody. He cut himself off from his family, from friends outside of the people that he would deal with on the force, and he only saw them when he had to. And then there was his nurse, Thelma, who was played by Queen Latifah. And that, but relatively small world and kind of a stultifying world. It kind of reminds me of, there's this movie called Whose Life Is It Anyway? Mm-hmm. With Richard Dreyfuss. I don't know if you remember this movie, but Richard Dreyfuss is one of my all-time favorite actors. This movie was another movie that was hard to watch, and this movie was similar, and that's about a guy who had all of his senses. This Richard Dreyfuss played a jerk of a guy, like a rich guy who is in a car accident that practically decapitates him, so he ends up being a quadriplegic. And then the movie takes off from there. So it reminds me of that from that standpoint. But I think that's what was going on with Denzel Washington. He didn't have anything to live for. Then this case comes up, and it's like, whoa, the senses are firing. It's like the cylinders are firing again, because guess what? Nobody knows how to figure out what's going on except for him. They need his particular brand of analysis, his keen insights, the way that he puts things together. And you see that in the movie. They make a point of showing you the way in which his mind works to put things together. And that's his unique gift. And he keeps talking to Angelina Jolie's character about her unique gifts. You have a unique gift. You have a gift for forensics. If I'm pushing you too hard, it's something to live for. Then this case comes up, and it's like, whoa, the senses are firing. It's like the cylinders are firing again, because guess what? Nobody knows how to figure out what's going on except for him. They need his particular brand of analysis, his keen insights, the way that he puts things together. And you see that in the movie. They make a point of showing you the way in which his mind works to put things together. And that's his unique gift. And he keeps talking to Angelina Jolie's character about her unique gifts. You have a unique gift. You have a gift for forensics. If I'm pushing you too hard, it's because I know you can do this. But he's not just talking to her, he's talking to himself, because
Sure.
He has the unique gifts. He shouldn't give up. That those sorts of things also apply to him. And I think I do give the movie credit for that parallelism that was going on. And that made the story more, interesting to watch.
So I guess to put it in a nutshell, there are a lot of extraordinary people in the world. Have met a few of them. I've been blessed to do that. And the reality is, there's so much more out there for each individual. So I hope people come away, who are listening and watching, come away with, first of all, make sure you see these films. All three of them are important. But I'm hoping people come away with the understanding that no matter what your obstacles are, no matter where you see yourself in the midst of issues you may have, that if all of us dig deep down within ourselves, we can bring out the better people that we are, bring out the intelligence that we have, bring out the capability that we were given at birth. There's more to us than what we even know sometimes. Sometimes it'll be people like Anne Sullivan bringing it out of us. Sometimes it'll be people who have this special talent, this special ability that people just have to recognize they have in order for them to excel, to shine. We all have those capabilities. To be honest with you, you never know what you can put together from the things that you already have. I just want people to realize that, we're all special in some way, and you can do it. They did it. And as far as the rest of us are concerned, they did it with less than the rest of us have. Karen, you mentioned earlier in our show on Blog Talk Radio about, wow, we have 5 senses. They might have had 2. And yet somehow they excelled. So
I complained about the weather today.
You complained about the weather and they didn't.
Right.
I noticed in the film, none of them complained about the weather.
Not one.
Not one. So with that being said, I think, we can all probably, if we put our mind to it, do a little better. Not just for the world, but ourselves, our self-esteem, build ourselves up so that we can build up others. So, well, that's pretty much it here for A Real Point of View on Google Plus and the YouTube channel. We want to thank everybody for listening in. And if you have an opportunity to like us, do so down at the bottom there. And visit our fan pages on Facebook. We're on Facebook at A Real Point of View, and also my blog on Facebook, which is The Real Movie Guy. You can send questions to either me or Karen about this episode. Me at right here